let me welcome you and our guest speaker, Vladimir Paperny, today to what seems to be the last event of this fall semester after a very intense lineup. Thank you for frequenting our series. I'm not saying it's definitely the last, who knows, but so far at least it is. And it's an immense honor to, and actually a pleasure, also to have this last event in the form of a lecture. I think we've had pretty much everything, but not lectures this term. We had a few films, book talks, etc. So this is a more traditional but no less exciting event that you have come to participate in. Our guest is Vladimir Paperny, who does not need an introduction to many of you, but let me just say that he is a graduate of the Stroganov Art Academy in Moscow with a master's degree in design. His PhD in cultural studies from the Russian State Universities for the Humanities resulted in a perhaps the most famous book called Kultura 2, Culture 2, Architecture in the Age of Stalin, that has been translated into multiple languages and just become invaluable for anyone working on this time period. Since moving to the US in '81, Vladimir Paperny was a visiting professor and lecturer at several universities in California, but also in the UK. He was a fellow at the Woodrow Wilson Center in DC twice, and he continues his work as a designer and a filmmaker as well. So the full title of today's lecture, as it was announced, is much longer. It's actually War and Exhibitions, How Nikita Khrushchev Wanted to Fool Richard Nixon at the 1959 Exhibition of Economic Achievements in Moscow and what came out of it. And what came out of it, you are about to hear from Vladimir himself. So let me welcome Vladimir once again to Hunter, and please join me in doing so. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasha, for your kind introduction. I will be talking about war and exhibitions. And I would like to start with a famous saying by well-known theoretician of war, von Clausewitz, who said, war is a continuation of politics by other means. There was another brilliant thinker, Jean-Louis Cohen, who tragically died a few months ago, and it's a huge loss for everybody who is involved with architecture, and a personal loss for me. But he kind of paraphrased von Clausewitz. He said, exhibitions is the continuation of war by other means. And that's very, very true. So let's look at the Philadelphia International Exhibition, where in the German pavilion, among household items and industrial stuff, they exhibited two huge cannons, the biggest ever made, probably even today. There is no bigger cannon than these two. And even the Germans were a little uneasy about displaying military stuff in an international exhibition. And the head of the German pavilion, General Franz Rulo, he said, are we not imposing on foreigners the idea that militarism is flourishing in Germany? Of course, they were. And interesting fact is that those cannons, as soon as the World War I started, were actually shelling Paris from the German side. So this militarism idea was kind of materialized. Pablo Picasso famously said that artists who live and work with spiritual values cannot and must not remain indifferent to conflict. And here's one of the most famous pieces by Picasso, Guernica, which is about this bombing of the little Spanish town, which the whole raid was conceived as a birthday present for Hitler by Goering. And they wanted to do it on April 20th, which was actually Hitler's birthday, but technically they couldn't do it, so they did it a few days later, and Hitler was delighted nevertheless. So it's a nice birthday present, complete destruction of the city, and killing about 1,500 residents. Now, in 1937, one of the biggest international exhibitions in Paris, this painting was prominently displayed in the Spanish pavilion, and the pavilion was very modernist, and it was designed by famous Spanish architects. But the real conflict took place on another side. There was, I wonder if I can show something on the screen. No, apparently I cannot. Anyway, there is a Soviet pavilion on the right and the German pavilion on the left. And you can see that the worker with a hammer and the peasant woman with a sickle, they're kind of attacking the German pavilions. And the German pavilion is exactly the opposite. It's like a fortress. They're kind of express the idea, so we are invincible. You can try, but tough luck. The Soviet pavilion was designed by Boris Iofan, probably the most famous and the most decorated of Soviet architects, and very, very talented. So it was an interesting architectural creation, and the sculpture was made by Vera Mukhina, a very talented sculptor. And the German pavilion, of course, was designed by Albert Speer, and the conflict wasn't lost on the visitors, on the press, on the journalists, commentators. This is a close-up of both. All the photographs, this photograph was taken from the Soviet pavilion, looking at the German pavilion. The French newspaper Candide published this cartoon that kind of spelled out what this confrontation means. And how did it happen? Such obvious visual conflict. There are two different versions of the explanations. This is the picture from the Soviet pavilion looking at the German. You can see this huge boot or whatever it is of the worker, and the German pavilion behind. There is a story that, excuse me, I need to turn off the phone. Speer, in his memoirs, tells the story which now we know is completely fabricated. It has nothing to do with reality. The story he's telling is that wandering through the pavilions, I happened to wander into the room where lay a secret sketch of the Soviet pavilion. And so I decided, because it's so aggressive, my idea was to kind of present the German pavilion more like a victim of the Soviet aggression, but also very strong a victim. It has nothing to do with reality. Now, the Soviet designer, when they realize this visual confrontation, also were very uneasy. They said, we didn't want this confrontation, we just wanted to show, happy, and it was too late. They couldn't change, it was already built. They didn't know what to do, so both were kind of unhappy. Schwerer was a little more happy. But now people search their archives, the real story is quite different. The chief architect of the whole exhibition, Jacques Grébert, he was, first of all, a big fan of Speer, so he simply gave him the plans, the Soviet plans, and said, keep in mind this. First of all, he wanted to do a favor to his friend, but also he was hoping that it will kind of spark some kind of confrontation, maybe even the war between those two countries. And this way, they will fight one another and Europe will be saved. That was the plan of Jacques Grébert. The confrontation, at least visual, happened. The war took place, but Europe wasn't quite safe. So nothing really worked. Now, it's very interesting to look inside of those two pavilions, the German and the Soviet. What's interesting, in the Soviet Union by 1937, modernism was completely banned, declared bourgeois, decadent, wrong, and even foreign and bad in any respect. So Kazimir Malevich was completely forgotten. No art history even mentioned his name. He died in 1935, but by 1937, nobody even could remember. Of course, everybody knows the famous black square on the white background, but he also created interesting three-dimensional compositions, so-called architectons, as he called them. And what's interesting that for internal consumption, modernism was completely banned. But for the international show, they said, no, we have to show you. So they found some students of Malevich and said, could you recreate some of his three-dimensional abstract composition and we'll decorate our interior with those. So you can see those vertical columns. It's very much Malevich, but kind of stretched vertically. Malevich objects were much smaller. Now, if we look inside the German pavilion, you'll see that Germany was much more consistent in its anti-modernist stance. There is absolutely nothing of avant-garde. You see those chandeliers. There were no photographs. All images were painted on canvases. It was all paintings in golden frames, and you see them on the wall. It was very kind of programmatic statement. This is tradition. And the wall covering was especially made fabric. If you look closely, you'll see that the pattern is made out of swastikas overlapping, interlocking. Now, both pavilions had cars. That's also very interesting. The German pavilion showed extremely advanced technologically and aesthetically racing Mercedes. The Soviet pavilion showed the car that was called M1, and people called it MK. It was the nickname for this car, but actually it was Ford. It was built on a Ford factory in the Soviet Union, and the whole factory was designed by an American architect and builder. So the reaction was, look, this is a very technologically advanced country, and the Soviet Union is showing them something old-fashioned and not originally at all. So it was, it misfired for the Soviet Union. Now we have to talk about one of the most tragic events in the Soviet history, so-called collectivization. The idea of collectivization was to eliminate kulaks as class. But in fact, it meant eliminating so many of those people actually died, so they were eliminated in every possible sense. Now, what is kulaks? Kulak in Russian means fist, but it also means a well-to-do peasant who can afford hiring other peasants as helpers. So as soon as one peasant hires somebody to help, he automatically becomes exploitation. So he is class enemy. And Stalin's idea was we have to eliminate any vestiges of capitalism. Keep in mind that capitalism was moved back by Lenin in his new economic policy. It didn't matter for Stalin. Capitalism needs to die. This kind of sensational and dramatic policy of liquidating kulaks had many very strong opposition from the Politburo, and everybody who opposed it eventually perished, as we know. You don't argue with Comrade Stalin. So the consequences were extremely tragic. Of course, in the Soviet press, there was absolutely no information about what actually was going on in the village, but you can see in the Chicago newspaper, they had photographs, they had statistics, and the scale of famine was absolutely enormous, even knowing how it happened in the Russian history many times, but never on the same scale. There are some numbers. So large cities were surrounded by troops to prevent hungry and dying peasants to enter the city. So the city dwellers should not know anything about what was going on in the villages, and they were not allowed to enter the cities. And still there were problems with food production, and the solution that Stalin thought of was quite, I would say, original. He wanted to create an exhibition of of agricultural production in the center of, not in the center, on the outskirts of Moscow, in a huge territory, gated territory, where they would create an artificial abundance of food, vegetables, fat cows and fat pigs, created and raised specifically for this exhibition. And it was a very strange idea. It has some religious overtones. It reminds about those few loaves of bread that Jesus fed 5,000 people, because Stalin graduated from the Orthodox Academy. So it could have been somewhere in his mind to create the miracle this way. Now, but building this agricultural exhibition was also very dramatic. The first commissar in charge of agriculture, Chernov, was accused of being the enemy of the people and arrested and shot in 1938. He was replaced by Ehe, another people's commissar, was arrested and shot in 1938. Now, Vyacheslav Altarzhevsky was an architect, a very talented architect, who in the 1920s emigrated to the United States and became very successful architect in the United States. He worked in some major architectural companies, and he, when he returned to the Soviet Union, he was the only person who knew something about skyscrapers and how to build them. When the Great Depression happened in the United States, there was no work for architects, and he was invited to come back to the Soviet Union and said, look, they have depression, conflict, we don't have any depression, we don't have any conflict, come back, everything will be fine. He came back and he was immediately put in charge of the whole agricultural exhibition. He created the plan, that very smart plan for the exhibition. It's still, what it is there now is still according to his plan. And he designed, he was commissioned to design the main entrance. And this is all the people who were arrested and executed. But here is the entrance that Altarzhevsky designed, and it was immediately rejected. He said, are you kidding us? It's the biggest thing, and it should be monumental, and what is this? It's a fence for cattle. That was considered not bad, but almost enemy provocation. Another thing that people didn't like about him, he brought his secretary from the United States, and she worked with him working on the exhibition, and they spoke English at work, and that was it. Of course, he was a spy. Who normal Soviet person would speak English with his secretary? But not enough. When his entrance was rejected, he tried to create one a little more monumental, was rejected because they found another thing. On the left, we see Polyakov project for the entrance with very strange, unorthodox hammers and sickle. Polyakov was forgiven for this mistake because it must be a standard combination of the two. But when Altarzhevsky tried an unorthodox hammer and sickle, they immediately found something really bad. He said, look, the hammer is hitting the sharp edge of the sickle. What does he want to tell us? He wants to tell us there is a conflict between the workers' class and the class of peasants. And their alliance is a kind of a cornerstone of the whole ideology. So he was arrested, was sent to the Gulag, but as an architect, not only he survived, but he was living in much better conditions because he was immediately put in charge of designing barracks for other prisoners. So he had an office, drafting equipment, and he survived. Now, in 1943, he was released and returned to Moscow. Why? Because in 1943, Stalin already was thinking about skyscrapers in Moscow. And the only person who knew anything about skyscrapers in Russia was this arrested Vyacheslav Altajevsky. So he was brought back, given all his titles back, given an office, and he actually designed at least one or two of those skyscrapers. So it's a tragic story with a happy ending, kind of. Now, the entrance, because Altajevsky's entrance was completely rejected, Polyakov, we saw his strange hammers and sickles, was forgiven for his wrong hammer and sickle, and he built this one, and everybody said it was okay, but still not monumental enough. In 1954, it was replaced by a much more monumental entrance. If you compare the height of the person to the whole thing, this is, you cannot be more monumental than this. And I take this picture in 2014, and it still stands there and looks as monumental as it should. Now, here is kind of another chapter in the Soviet history. In 1956, Nikita Khrushchev made his so-called secret speech at the 20th Party Congress. Only specially checked and approved people were able to attend his speech, and it was secret. Surprisingly, next morning it was published all over the world in every newspaper. How did it happen? Nobody knows. And in the secret speech, he denounced Stalin's crimes, kind of forgetting to mention that he participated in all of them. Nevertheless, it kind of opened completely new era in the Soviet Union, so-called thaw. And he was the first leader of the Soviet Union who actually went to the United States and with his wife. That never happened before. The idea of a wife never kind of existed among the Politburo. They all had wives, but they were not active figures. And Nina Petrovna, you can see her, Khrushchev, Eisenhower, and they had a very productive meeting. They signed many agreements on collaborations. It was collaborations in broadcast, films, airline flights, magazines, people, travel, students, exchange, sports, and so forth. It was really, really amazing if you consider what was before 1953, before Stalin died. Another part of the agreement was exchange of magazines. So the idea was the Soviet Union will publish in English this magazine called Soviet Life, and it will be sold all over the United States. And the Americans will create this America magazine in Russian, and it will be available in the Soviet Union. Now, Soviet Life was never very popular in the United States. So out of the whole print run, maybe 30% were sold, and the remaining 70%, they, as a kind of a custom for business, they packed and sent back to the Soviet Union. So in the Soviet Union, they counted how many copies they returned, and returned exactly the same number of copies of America. Now, but the demand for America was enormous. People who happened to have one copy was giving it to friends, and at the end it was completely destroyed because everybody wanted to know. There were a few newsstands in the center of Moscow where international hotels were foreigners that had a few copies of so who really wanted to get one, they knew ways of getting it. I know my grandfather was a big fan of this magazine. He paid almost like a salary to the person at the newsstand to keep each copy for him. Anyway, now exhibitions. That was the site of the agricultural exhibition, and they had two types of pavilions. Some pavilions were dedicated to a certain geographic area, like the pavilion of Moscow or the Ukraine, and other one were any area of economy. For example, you see this huge cupola, that was space exploration. There was a pavilion of meat production, for example, and different kinds. Now, the most interesting confrontation happened when the Americans built the famous American exhibition in the Sokolniki Park on the outskirts of Moscow, and it had an enormous attractiveness for everybody. I was probably 15 at that time, and my friends and I, we found every hole in the fence where we can sneak in without tickets, and our objective was to get in line for Pepsi Cola. And there was a very long line for free Pepsi. And what we did, we would stay in line, get it, and then immediately go back to the line. And this way we were going back and forth. And at the end of the day, we were completely drunk on Pepsi. And usually at the end, two militiamen would grab us and just push us out. So it was smashing success. Now, in preparation for this American show, Khrushchev said we have to have our exhibition of our national achievements, and they decided to use the agricultural exhibition because agriculture was no longer important. The grain was bought from the United States anyway, so they decided to convert it into exhibition of national achievements. Architecturally, they pretty much used the same pavilions, but they were renamed. So let's see, that was the pavilion of Volga region in 1937. This is already a second version of this pavilion. The first one was even more avant-garde, constructivist, and modern. This is something in the middle. The center looks a little like constructivism, but there are some cornices there, more traditional. It was rejected anyway. So another one was built in high Stalinism style, the same pavilion. Now, if we fast forward, we'll see what happened next. When they knew that Richard Nixon was coming to Moscow to present the American exhibition, they said, "Oh, we have to take him to our exhibition of national achievement, and we know from our sources that they will show a color TV in their exhibition, and there was no color TV in the Soviet Union, so we have to have one color TV." So they took this pavilion and created a fake aluminum facade around it and called it radio electronics. And inside there was a working model of a color TV, and the plan was we'll take Nixon, bring him there, said, "Look, we had it for many years." Now, this fake aluminum facade was done in such a hurry that this is the picture I took much later. They only covered the front and a little bit of the sides. If you go behind, you'll see the same Stalinist architecture. They didn't have time for this. But if we fast forward, when Putin and the mayor of Moscow, Sobyanin, decided that we have to restore the glory of the Russian Empire, aluminum facade had to be eliminated. And they called some workers who, with chainsaws and everything, cut it into pieces. Unfortunately, here it is very obvious. When people installed the fake aluminum facade, they did it in such a hurry that they completely destroyed all the Stalinist beauty. And it stood this way for quite a few years. I photographed it, I think, 2014 or 15. But happily or unhappily, it was returned to the Stalinist glory recently. Now, this is how it looks now. It's, again, no radio electronics. It's the Volga region, pavilions in all its glory. And finally, the exhibitions. The Soviet exhibition in New York wasn't a failure. It wasn't a smashing success, but people were interested to see all the space exploration stuff, the rockets and those capsules, because the understanding was that the Soviet Union was much more advanced in space exploration, which was true. That was already Sputnik, there was a Gagarin flight around, the two dogs were launched into space, poor creatures to die there. That was impressive. But when they looked on the smaller picture at Soviet cars, they didn't impress anybody, because it looked like a very rough imitation of American cars with a lot of golden and silver sparkling details. However, the American exhibition was really a smashing success. People couldn't get away from American cars. And you have to realize that Soviet cars, we only had maybe two models, Moskvich, Emka, and later Pobeda. And there were small cars and those huge American Chrysler and Chevy. People couldn't believe their eyes. And if you read the book for visitors, they shared their impression. Everybody said, "Of course it's not real. Of course it's all just for the single working models, just to impress us. Nobody has such cars in the United States." And the same reaction was about all the kitchen machinery and so forth, and the famous kitchen debate between Khrushchev and Nixon. There is, you can find it online. There is a video of this whole debate, and it's spectacular. You have to see it. But there was another weapon that Americans brought, abstract art. Now, if you read the book for visitors, everybody said, why did they bring this garbage? There's spots, lines, we don't understand. Everybody hated it, except young students of art schools. They found something that they wanted, and there started the underground Soviet art movement right there after the show. So this kind of, that was the real working propaganda. It worked. And eventually it, to some degree, it ended the Soviet Union. It was another thing that I don't have a picture of it, the book display. They had many books on the display, and after each day, all the books disappeared. And the Americans were very happy. It was totally okay with them. But the management said, no, you cannot do it. They said, but we have to replace. Okay, you can replace it, but you have to hammer each book to the wall. So what they did, they put the back cover and with nails hammered it to the wall. At the end of the day, there were only back covers. Now, the idea of bringing Nixon to this radio electronic pavilion, show him a working model of TV, didn't work. Nixon didn't want to go there. He was driven through the exhibition, and he sent a secret telegram to Eisenhower. It said, visited the Soviet exposition, nothing momentous. That was it. It was a total failure. Thank you. Now, I would be happy to answer any questions if somebody else has and comments, say anything. You can ask me about anything. There is no such thing as a stupid question, there is only stupid answers. Yes, please.
I would just say I thought it was brilliant because it's so like I would never think of how do I say this? I would never think of putting this two and two together. Such conflicts could go even into like art exhibitions. Mm-hmm. Even I guess the question would be, how did you come up with this topic? Like, what was the spark that came to you that's like, oh, these two topics go together?
So what sparked my interest in this whole story?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, the very first impulse was when I attended the American exhibition in 1959, when I was 15. I met with a completely different civilization. You have to imagine, I grew up in the Stalinist empire. All information about the world was through our teachers, our radio, and later television. And anything about the United States was always only negative. It's a terrible country. People are starving there, and there is not enough housing, whatever. And all of a sudden, we saw a completely different presentation. And I met the gentleman who was in charge, an American producer who was in charge of the whole American exhibition. His name is Jack Macy. He passed away a few years ago. But we became friends, and he was telling me stories how it happened. It was interesting, the enthusiasm of the American companies, American designers, American artists, everybody who worked on this exhibition was enormous, because all of a sudden our enemy is becoming our client, in a sense, because we're showing them goods that possibly they will eventually buying from us. And the whole idea of converting a former enemy into a friend, many American companies sent everything for free. A lot of designers and architects worked for free because everybody was excited, because it's a new era in international relationship. And that was such enormous change, especially for young people like I was at that time. So the whole world kind of opened in front of us. It was completely different understanding of the world. And then American exhibition was followed by the British exhibition and then the French exhibition. So the world all of a sudden became open. And eventually travel between the countries became possible under Gorbachev and Yeltsin and so forth. So that's, I hope I answered your question.
Yes, thank you, you did.
Yes, go ahead.
Hello, I have one brilliant talk, thank you very much. And I have one point of criticism. I want to hear more, like I would use other stuff, it's really brilliant. So in line of this suggestion, so my question is, like, if you would extend this line of like confronting exhibition or war exhibition, as you say, like where is the rupture, or like, could you just draw this line till today? And but today, I mean, like I study contemporary art and the contemporary war situation, and I can't see anything like that. Of course, there are exhibitions against the war, if we take war in Ukraine, but there can be a dialogue in this regard.
Right now, there cannot be a dialogue, unfortunately, because when I wrote my PhD dissertation, it was in 1979, about cultural history of the Soviet Union, I was following the cycles of kind of opening and then closing. And I was trying to extrapolate this line into the future, and in 1979 I said that Stalinism, of course, will come back, and I mentioned approximately the year will it come back, and surprisingly it happened just like this, and right now Stalinism is alive and thriving in Russia. So that's the reason my dissertation of 1979 is being translated into foreign languages even today, because I had this kind of divine revelation about the future of Stalinism, and everybody laughed at me and said, especially under Yeltsin and Gorbachev, said, what Stalinism? Look, it's complete freedom. I didn't believe them, and I was right. Yeah, sure.
These are absolutely stunning images, juxtapositions. Could you speak a little bit more about just what stands behind them? I mean, the cultural Cold War, and to what extent these exhibitions were weapons on its kind of front lines of the cultural Cold War, to what extent, well, the CIA, through different covert projects, was also behind it, much as the Soviet secret services, and perhaps there is a story about a specific figure who is not as public as Nixon or Khrushchev, but someone like Paul Siklocha, for example, right?
Sorry, who?
Paul Siklocha. It's just an example, but someone who facilitated the exchange, right? Whether it's exchange of exhibitions or exchange of books or academic exchange or cultural exchange. So just kind of the background for that.
That's a very good question, especially the CIA involvement in creating the exhibition. I had a conversation with Jack Macy, who was in charge of the whole exhibition as a producer. He was hiring architects. He hired the best architects. Buckminster Fuller created the dome. The best architects worked there, designers, and many of them worked for reduced fees. They were ready to do it because it was excitement. And I asked him specifically, did you get any instructions from the CIA? He said, no, we didn't. But the organization for which he worked as a producer, it was set up, as I understand now, by the CIA. It was USA, I forgot.
International U.S. Information Agency.
U.S. Information Agency. Yes, it was set up by the CIA. I mean, CIA had its own objectives. They were fighting communism. But the agency did a lot of good things. They provided information, they provided the exhibition, they distributed books at the exhibition. So, of course, there was a political background for this, and sometimes it could be an ugly political background. But I, as a recipient of this, cannot really complain, because it opened my eyes, it showed me the world I never even heard of. So I have kind of a mixed feelings about the CIA involvement. So I can understand why some people are completely say it was just a vicious international imperialism, basically. But for us, it was a blessing to some degree. Yeah?
Well, I mean, I would add to it in terms of the CIA, to broaden the scope a little bit, there was a tremendous amount of investment also in bringing jazz to the Soviet Union. This is an art form, along with modern art, that was very foreign, and many of the elites in the Soviet Union hated it, right? Because it's not a classic form. But that was a big part of also the CIA program, and a lot has been written on that. But it's interesting to note that during the time of Khrushchev, there was that period, albeit fairly small, when there was that competition for hearts and minds. There was a global competition for power, yes, but there was the whole hearts and minds, which is what these exhibitions were all about. Today, back to the question that came earlier, that is simply impossible because, frankly, neither side gives a damn about the hearts and minds. We're so polarized and so beyond that's an impossibility. But there was a great anecdote, which I'm sure you know, about the Pepsi and getting Khrushchev to drink the Pepsi.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Don Kendall really wanted Khrushchev to drink Pepsi, and Khrushchev was not about to drink the Pepsi. So they told him, it's okay, Comrade Nikita. This Pepsi was made in the Soviet Union. Oh, okay, that's fine.
Well, it's a very good point. But regarding jazz, there was another source. The radio programs, Willis Conover and Jazz Hour.
Right.
I have many friends who never missed a single, it was once a week. Everybody had tape recorders ready, and they recorded everything that Willis Conover put on air, and that created the new Soviet jazz, because there was the old Soviet jazz in 1920s and 1930s, but the bebop and more contemporary jazz came through the radio Voice of America. Now, because it was in English, it wasn't jammed. Voice of America in Russian was jammed. Some smart people figured out how to avoid jamming. You can do it by going outside of Moscow like 100 miles, and the jamming wasn't working there. So people tried different tricks. It was not only Voice of America, it was BBC, it was Deutsche Welle, and all the European broadcasting in Russian was considered enemy propaganda. In a sense it was, of course, but then we were eager to get some hidden facts that we couldn't get from Pravda.
Yes.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask more about the abstract expressionist art that was displayed in the exhibition, since I know that like within the US, abstract expressionism was sort of used as a Cold War weapon, where like kind of on both sides, where people would say like, oh, you know, it has this kind of malign Eastern European influence, but on the other hand, it was also used to kind of show the freedom that American artists had compared to how circumscribed Soviet artists were. And so I was just wondering how American abstract expressionist artists like were presented at these exhibitions and the kind of language that was used to talk about them in the Soviet Union.
By the Americans, what the Americans said to the Russians.
Yeah.
They didn't say much. They just created the exhibition and said, just see it. And the majority of the people were shocked and hated it because they were not exposed to the Russian avant-garde of the 1920s, which was hidden in some underground storages. Nobody knew about it. So for them it was just, look at those Americans, they're crazy. We knew they were crazy, but look what they present as
Especially Jackson Pollock, right?
Jackson Pollock, yeah. Of course, the young art schools students, and some of them were friends of mine, they were just absorbing it like crazy, because it was what they were missing and they wanted it. And by the way, I remember when I entered the art school in Moscow, I entered the so-called Stroganov Art, now it's called Stroganov Art Academy. It was a university-level art school. That was my first education as a designer. On the first year, I was called to some office, and there was a guy who introduced himself as KGB agent, and said, I need to talk to you, I need some information from you. I know that some of your friends and students interested in abstract art, and we consider it propaganda, and it's really bad. So how do you feel about abstract art? I said, this is a very strange question, because abstract art was invented like 30 years ago. What all of a sudden it was Kandinsky, Malevich, and so it's an old trick. What's wrong with it? I don't know anybody who is really interested, because there are some newer movements in art, like conceptualism or magic realism, photographic realism, and others. You're behind the time. Who cares about abstract art? It's old. So the guy said, well, but if you notice that somebody is interested, will you report? I said, no, I will not, because it's and somehow I got away with it.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Thank you for the presentation. You started with those two canons at the beginning. I'm just curious, how do you explain this like disappearance of weaponry from this list of national achievements displayed on this exhibit?
I want to make sure I understand the question. How I feel about
How do you, it doesn't seem like they were showing any like
Edvedenha.
weapons of like tools to killing of some sort.
I don't think after this German pavilion in the 19th century, I don't think it ever happened in international shows because it kind of backfired for the Germans at that time. So everybody was reluctant to do this because they found much stronger weapons like abstract art or films or books or information. It's much better than tanks and cannons. I would say, and it's less destructive. I mean, if you think that abstract art is really bad and it damages your mind, then of course it is destructive. But I don't think it is. Does it answer your question?
Yeah. It just seems like now there is like
I cannot recall any international exhibition where people would show AK-47 and machine guns. That would be really, really.
But there's always a weapon like behind those, like America and the USSR. Like there's always a knowledge that they are capable of, you know, behind all of this.
Well, in shows for internal consumption created for the Soviet people, you would see a lot of paintings with soldiers, war heroes, and all kind of military victories and tragedies, whatever. War was much more ingrained in the psyche of Russian people. Especially World War II, which brought enormous destructions and deaths and so forth. So Stalin was smart when he said, war propaganda is the worst crime that could happen. That was the law introduced by Stalin. It's interesting to read it now when all we hear from Russia is war propaganda. So it's another paradox.
Could it also be the disappearance or the lack of actual weapons at these exhibitions? Isn't it because of the thought and the general sort of movement or inclination towards kind of cooling down the tensions, even though it was the Cold War, which came to replace the actual World War II, of course?
It is possible, but I think World War II was so terrible for so many millions of people that nobody would probably want to see it again, especially in an exhibition advertising something. I don't think Stalin was smart when he said propaganda of war is a crime. He didn't think he didn't help Putin now because now all he says is war propaganda. So he's according to Stalin, who Putin wants to resurrect, he is a war criminal because he all he says is a war propaganda. But his conflict doesn't exist for him. He doesn't understand it. And besides, there are much stronger weaponry, not only drones and rockets, but online. The how you call those operators who break into other countries?
Hackers.
Hackers.
Hackers,
Yeah, hackers, exactly. That could create much more serious danger than any tank. If, let's say, the whole network of military organization could be compromised, that's significantly worse than destroying a few tanks, I would think.
I would say that there is was a special niche for the military, for the demonstration of military power, which when they resurrected all the parades.
You're right, yes.
Right, so it was like just different venue, and that was very much for the international show also.
Absolutely, but it was not international, it was for the local consumption. Of course, it was also to...
It was televised all over.
To tell them, so see what we have.
But it's also relatively meaningless now because the technology, the delivery of the technology, be it an F-16, F-35, or whatever, you can't see the electronics behind it. What you're seeing is the jet, and the real power is in the electronics. So
Exactly.
there's no real threat to show, the actual hardware
Exactly.
anymore.
That's what I was saying, that the hackers are much stronger soldiers than people with machine guns.
Right.
Well, maybe you have time for one more question, if there is one. Maybe from a student to wrap up this semester. All of that. Yes, please.
It's a general comment or slash I'll like about the stories that you said along with the slides. It's just the one artist that kept getting arrested for slightly doing something wrong, like, oh, the hammer was too close to the sickle. It's just, this guy cannot catch a break, sort of deal. It's like, oh, you could design blocks in prison, even though you just stayed at the prison. And then, I believe you said Stalin let him out to be able to do exhibition or
Skyscrapers.
skyscrapers. But then I think he also messed that up too.
No,
No.
not
The
skyscraper.
skyscrapers he did mess up,
Design.
but everything else he did.
Yeah, it was just, oh yeah. But I just like the happy, I like the mess ups because that's in life in general, just you mess up a lot and then. There are different consequences, of course, but.
It's a weird way.
Well, he was actually very lucky because he survived the Gulag. Then he was in charge of skyscraper construction. And one of there are 7 in Moscow skyscrapers, but they're not called skyscrapers, they're called high-rise buildings. And they're all kind of like pyramids, they're not straight. Now they have straight ones too, copying the Americans. But I lost my thought, sorry.
He was lucky because he was lucky that he
Yes, thank you. He was lucky because not only he was put in charge, he and another architect, they actually designed one of the 7 skyscrapers. Now, his partner received Stalin Prize, which is like 100,000 rubles, a lot of money. And Altarzhevsky, because he was imprisoned at some point, received nothing. But he was restored as an architect with all his credentials, but no money.
He didn't go back to America, right?
No, he didn't.
Oh, all right. Thank you so much, Vladimir.